If you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know that I have a bit of a history with Jim Jefferies. Back in 2018, I made a video criticizing him for being a joke-stealing grifter with a cephalopodian ability to change his image. This video remains one of my most heavily contested videos, but in early 2019, my dissection of Jim Jefferies was ultimately vindicated when his show was exposed for dishonestly editing an interview with Australian YouTuber Avi Yemeni. In the time since I made my follow-up video on the Avi Yemeni debacle, there haven't been many developments in the Jim Jefferies sphere, until early in July, when he released a new Netflix special titled Intolerant. You guys know I'm a glutton for punishment when it comes to hack comedians, and just based on the trailer for the special, I knew I had to watch it.
Now to tell this story, I have to start off by saying that I'm lactose intolerant, the most dangerous cheeses of them all. Lactose is now coursing through my veins. I am on borrowed time. Come on! Pick a f***ing cream. Pick a cream. Come on! I'm gonna shit myself!
Unfortunately for me, it didn't turn out to be the embarrassingly so bad that it's a good again experience that I imagined it would be. The best way to describe Intolerant would be to say that it was bland, generic, and felt interminably long. Had I been listening to this special as background noise, it might not have been that bad. But actively trying to watch it was mind-numbingly boring, because Jim finds new and inventive ways of saying almost nothing. While watching Intolerant, I was reminded of another special that I recently watched that similarly suffered from a lack of substance. Chris D'Elia's No Pain. Both of them use the same technique of not actually telling a joke or even saying anything particularly funny. Instead, they make a mundane statement with the rhythm and inflection of a joke to hopefully trick your brain into laughing.
Dolphins fuck people. Hey, are you listening to me? How come when I say that, everybody's not running around?
I've never been out and gone, f*** me, the quails are out tonight.
The only difference is that one man stretches his material out by speaking like a mentally challenged immigrant, and the other man is Chris D'Elia. Aside from Jim's infuriating, fake, drunken, bogan accent, the real issue here is that every single bit he does is completely pointless and excruciatingly drawn out. The entire set is built around the premise of Mr. Nugent being lactose intolerant. That might not be a horrible idea if it was a running theme that tied the entire set together, or even had a rewarding ending. Instead, it's just a long and boring story that Jim keeps interrupting with uninteresting tangents. The basic format is as follows. Jim starts telling a story about how he's lactose intolerant. At some point, he lumbers off on a meandering rant about another topic that doesn't have a good conclusion or payoff. So, when the bit runs out of steam, Jim just switches back to the lactose intolerant story with a non sequitur.
But my grandson says he identifies as an Asian woman who wants to be a black man and marry a f***ing robot, and I'm not having it. So my point is, I can't eat cheese.
It's a little like Louis C.K.'s Awesome Possum bit, where he starts off talking about being in a coffee shop, but goes on a tangent about how much he hates a roller skater.
Fucking go skating to an AIDS tree, you motherfucker!
And then abruptly cuts back to talking about the coffee shop.
But anyway, yeah, so I was in the coffee place with the young people.
Louis was smart enough to keep the Awesome Possum bit down to about 3 minutes though, whereas Jim Jefferies uses the format for over an hour. You can probably imagine how exhausting this becomes. It's particularly bad when Jim is talking about having dinner at a restaurant that serves tasting menus, and he keeps making the same unfunny joke over and over again.
Every dish includes a foam, a reduction, and there's always a quail's egg. Always with a quail's egg. Why can't they use a f***ing chicken egg? Think of it, and a truffle, and a moose. If I've ever always seen a reduction of moose and a foam next to a quail's egg with a truffle on top. It was a lactose crumble next to a lactose foam with a lactose reduction with a truffle with a scoop of ice cream, and then they freeze dried the quail's egg tableside and sprinkled.
Do you remember Boba Fett?
As bad as this is, I think the bigger problem with the structure of the set is that it's nothing more than a lazy way to make the individual, unrelated bits seem like they're connected via the vague framework of the lactose intolerance story. Jim Jefferies shoehorns these bits in like ecstasy into a teenager's mouth. At one point during the story about the tasting menu, he mentions the French waiter bringing out the fromage course, which he uses as a segue into a joke about Italian Americans not sticking with an accent.
He could have said cheese, he knows the f***ing words cheese. You've been in an Italian restaurant on the Gold Coast and go, hey, enjoying your meal? It's good, right? My mother, she used to make it with the mozzarella. It's like he had a f***ing stroke in the middle of the f***ing word. Mozzarella.
That's the joke. The same gabagool Italian-Americans can't pick an accent joke that people have been making for years or decades. I'm not saying every single joke a comedian makes needs to be a slam dunk, but the majority of his jokes feel like filler that should have been weeded out of the set by the time he filmed the special. They're not particularly good or bad. They're bland and generic, which seems to be the direction Jim is taking his career in after his foray into woke comedy. What interested me in this special enough to give it a watch was my curiosity over where Jim was going to go post Jim Jefferies show. Would he become more vocally progressive, or would he revert back to a more offensive style? We got a glimpse of this last year during the Shane Gillis controversy, when Jim offered a fairly anemic criticism of cancel culture and digging up old remarks from people's past.
Well, this is just cancel culture. The guy shouldn't have been fired. It's just a couple of things back in his history. We're going to go through everyone's history.
Back then, she was 17 years old. I didn't know. I met her in a bar. But it's also, may I add, that that's legal in the UK. That's age of consent, so I didn't do anything wrong. I did ply her full of ecstasy, so I'm no but not like I didn't drug her, but we were taking ecstasy all night.
On Intolerant, he tackles the same subjects with a similarly bloodless tone. The first major bit of this special is about Jim Jefferies' father thinking he's progressive for voting in favor of gay marriage, yet still holding some homophobic views.
They can do whatever they want in their own homes behind closed doors, as long as they don't try to involve me. I'm always like, Dad, are they trying to involve you? Is there a scenario? There's two gay fellas in the inner suburbs of Sydney. Maybe we should try to involve Gary Jefferies.
The first time I watched this bit, I thought Jim must have stolen it from Louis C.K. It just sounded familiar, and Jim has been known to borrow from other comedians like Doug Stanhope. After a while, I came to the conclusion that Jim didn't steal the bit, but it's such a generic, watered-down opinion that it sounds like a joke Louis C.K. made 13 years ago. That being said, this bit is really just a stepping stone to another bit criticizing millennials for not letting old people be old.
Here's the thing about millennials. You're the worst people that have ever lived.
Millennials, you're a bunch of rats, all of you.
You know, it's refreshing to finally see a comedian criticize millennials. Stunning and brave. Before I went into this special, I thought the worst case scenario would be Jim going even further to the left. In hindsight, that was foolish. I should have known that the cuttlefish would find a way to scoot his way back to the center and start doing a lukewarm Bill Burr tribute act. Honestly, I would have had more respect for Jim if he had gone more woke. At least then he would have shown some integrity and values. Instead, every time Jim attempts social commentary, it seems like the bit was crafted so that it sounds like he's saying something edgy, while in reality he's giving the most middle-of-the-road take on an issue. Like his relevant and biting commentary on the 2016 Ghostbusters remake, which he stated was a bad movie because it was bad, not because the cast was female. Whoa guys, looks like we have a revolutionary on our hands. You better check your incel opinions at the door unless you want to get a face full of barstool philosophy, motherfucker. The closest Jim comes to taking a stand during this set is when he complains about people getting offended by his old material. It's a point he's made multiple times in the past to deflect criticism. And in this special, I think he does make one decent point. Comedian's job is to get close to the line of what is socially acceptable, and over time that line will shift. It's unfair to retroactively try to cancel a comedian for something they did in the past when the standards were different. Unfortunately, that is as far as he goes with his defense of free speech. He does just enough to defend himself while steering away from controversy or making a broader point. And really, that is the story of the entire special. Jim errs on the side of caution and tells an hour-long joke with a tepid punchline about shitting his pants. The more I think about this special, the more I wonder who Jim Jefferies' act is meant for these days. He started to gain traction as a comedian when he was a few years older than I am now. Back then, he was telling jokes that I found funny as an edgy teenager. Now he's producing material that I barely know how to classify. It's like shock comedy with all the shock removed, so it can appeal to middle-aged Comedy Central viewers who think they have an edgy sense of humor because they listened to George Carlin once in 1993. I just don't know how somebody who liked Jim's material from around 2008 can enjoy the listless, milquetoast garbage he's hauling up on stage now. I have a hard time judging a special like Intolerant because it was so dull and uninteresting. It wasn't profoundly bad. Jim didn't shamelessly pander to anyone. However, aside from the specific bits I mentioned, I'm struggling to remember much of anything from the experience. I know I chuckled a few times, but even after watching a good chunk of the special for a second time, I couldn't tell you which jokes I found funny. They were that inconsequential. This isn't the worst special I've ever watched, but I'm worried about what it says for the future of stand-up comedy. I fear we're heading into a new dark age of mediocrity, and Jim Jefferies is the standard bearer. I could have made this video a little longer than it was, especially when it came to certain bits that I felt either could have been stolen from other comedians or just use very generically similar premises. After a while though, I just got bored with talking about how boring Jim Jefferies was, so I kept it a bit shorter. As always, I want to thank you for watching this video, as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing. If you want to support the channel, please check out the links in the description, and a big thank you to my supporters on Patreon who help make these videos possible. Thank you, Jordan Vezo, Joshua Renfrey, Dirtbag Thor, Erica Hughes, Tex Punjam, Bart Wakunar, Josh G. Grows Mids, Dan Thomas, Mike Roballs, Colin Donahue, Bone CK, James Taylor, Dalton Wyndham, Nico Spiridakis, Jambi Helmick, The Son of Man, Neem, Kevin Howard, Medication Doesn't Work, and Jackie.